Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. According to a recent survey from Go Banking Rates, only about 2% of people have $1 million saved for retirement. In fact, 1 in 5 have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. And another 29% have $0 saved for retirement. So that means almost 50% of people have $10,000 or less saved for retirement. When you look at stats like that, hitting that $1 million benchmark is a pretty impressive feat. Now, if we look at the most recent data from the Federal Reserve, we actually know that the millionaire stats are just a bit higher. A household having $1 million invested actually puts you in the top 94% of households in America. So not exactly the top 2%, but it's definitely up there. And I feel like when you talk about millionaire stats, there's a couple arguments that come out and they come across as sort of anti-millionaire. The first one is from people who say, oh, $1 million, that's really not worth anything. Inflation, you know? And on the one hand, yes, $1 million today doesn't have nearly the purchasing power as $1 million, say, 40 or 60 years ago. Consider that $1 million in 1983 would be the equivalent of over $3 million today in terms of purchasing power once you factor in inflation. And if you went all the way back to 1963 or 60 years ago, that would be the equivalent of over $10 million today. If you're interested in seeing how the value of $1 million has changed over time, I'll link a calculator from the Bureau of Labor Statistics down below. So certainly $1 million doesn't have the prestige it once did. But it's still certainly nothing to scoff at, because when you look at the stats, you see that it puts you in the uppermost percentiles. Consider that even as people approach retirement and stepping away from the workforce, the average and the median stats of investable assets are nowhere near this threshold. The other argument I often hear, I think, confuses a person with 1 million or even say a couple $1 million with the ultra rich, like the wealthy people you see on TV, those who are flying private, or those Warren Buffetts or the Bill Gates of the world. And these people are not just single-digit millionaires. These people you see living the luxe lifestyle, they are often people worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And then in the case of Warren Buffett, billions of dollars. But being a millionaire is nothing like being a billionaire. In fact, if you have $1,000, you're as close to being a millionaire as a person who has $1 million is close to being a billionaire. So it's not even in the same ballpark. But recently, when I was doing a video, I mentioned how millionaires were still frugal. They were still careful with their dollars, and they didn't necessarily spend lavishly at restaurants. And that segment was followed up with several comments saying that the reason that millionaires don't spend so much at restaurants is because they have a private chef cooking for them at home. And for 98% or maybe even 99% of millionaires, that's certainly not the case. Yes, reaching millionaire status is an extraordinary feat, but it still doesn't give you a green light to spend on absolutely anything and everything. And in no way am I trying to speak negatively of millionaire status. But let's consider the rule of 4%. The rule of 4% is generally considered a safe withdrawal rate, that a retiree could take out roughly 4% of their portfolio every single year, adjusting for inflation, and not run out of money. And as with any general rule of thumb, it's not perfect and it certainly has its critics. Some people say it's too aggressive, especially for an early retirement. So if you're going to go into an early retirement, perhaps you should use a more conservative withdrawal rate, maybe something in the ballpark of 3%. Others say it's too conservative, especially for a delayed retirement. And in that case, maybe you'd be better suited to have maybe a 5% rate of withdrawal. And as with everything in finance, it's really going to come down to your personal situation. When you retire, what does your investment breakdown look like? How conservatively or aggressively are you invested? What are your other income streams? But even if you use 3 to 5% as a range of your rate of withdrawal on $1 million portfolio, that's still only giving you an income of $30,000 to $50,000 a year from your investments. That is not having a private chef or flying on a private plane kind of lifestyle. Rather, it's more like the millionaire next door kind of lifestyle. And this is the case for the vast majority of millionaires out there. It's people who have worked incredibly hard to reach this milestone, and even after hitting it, they continue to live a modest lifestyle. So I think being a millionaire, a person who has $1 million or even a couple $1 million, falls somewhere in between both these extremes. I don't agree with the statement that, oh, $1 million is nothing these days in terms of purchasing power, But I also don't agree with having $1 million means that you have free reign to spend on absolutely anything and everything, especially if you're trying to make a portfolio last indefinitely. But with that said, I still think it's a worthy and amazing goal, and here's some reasons as to why. I think anytime you make a video that talks about finances, you're going to have some kind of comment that talks about inflation. And it seems like anytime you mention the word millionaire, you get inflation, inflation, inflation as a response. And sure, while $1 million certainly doesn't buy as much as it used to if you go back a handful of years or especially a handful of decades, it is still an impressive amount to have saved up. Just simply consider the fact that only 8.8% of households in the US can actually call themselves millionaires. And that stat includes people including their home value in their net worth. So being that over 91% of households have not hit this threshold, I certainly don't think we can say $1 million is nothing, because that's certainly not true. And consider if someone does have $1 million invested and they use the rule of 4%, that safe withdrawal rate, that would provide them an income of $40,000 a year. Add in any other income streams, perhaps a pension or Social Security, and that's enough to provide a very nice living for the vast majority of retirees. And if you're a person who's currently in your 20s or 30s and looking at a retirement that is 30 or 40 years down the road, and you want total financial freedom, yes, going a handful of decades down the road means that $1 million is going to have even less purchasing power. So maybe you set your goal a little bit higher. Maybe you set your goal to be 2, 3, or 4 million, because inflation inevitably will continue. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that $1 million is nothing and that you need to have something like $100 million to be wealthy. I say that because that's literally a comment I've received dozens of times on dozens of videos on this channel, because there's a huge difference between $1 million and $100 million. And I think the vast majority of us could agree that you could hit the wealthy benchmark somewhere long before having $100 million invested. If you talk to a lot of people who are interested in finance, a lot of them have the goal to reach millionaire status. And that is because it is a very clear and concise goal. $1 million. That is a far easier goal to visualize and get excited about than, say, a goal of, say, hitting $784,612. Now, whether or not you actually need $1 million to sustain your lifestyle once you reach financial freedom, well, that depends on your lifestyle. Maybe you need more. Maybe you need less. Maybe you really only need that $700 and whatever $1,000. But that's a hard number to get excited about. First of all, it doesn't have its own name in the way that millionaire does, but it's also just kind of an obscure number. At the end of the day, the number that matters most is the number that gets you to financial freedom, whether it's millionaire or not. But millionaire still has a nice ring to it. And if it's a goal that gets you excited, that's a big part of it, because there is psychology in going after these long-term goals. If you have a goal that gets you excited, it's going to be more fun to go after this goal. Compound interest is a really beautiful thing. There comes a point where your investments kind of make a shift. In the beginning, it's you doing a lot of the legwork. It's you making your contributions that's really doing the brunt of the work to make your portfolio grow. But there comes a point when a shift happens, where compound interest takes over, and the compound interest is what's making your portfolio grow the most, more than your contributions. In the beginning, it's like you're pushing a snowball. Slowly but surely, it gathers more snow and gets larger. But once you reach this point of critical mass, it's kind of like the snowball starts to roll down a hill, and as it does, it starts to get bigger and bigger on its own without any efforts on your part. I talk about this in the video where I talk about hitting your first $100,000 in investments, because for a lot of people, that's the benchmark where they really notice their portfolio starting to take off in terms of growth. And as you keep investing, and if you get a portfolio that reaches $1 million invested, that portfolio is capable of quite impressive growth. Let's say the market returns 10%. Well, that means your $1 million portfolio would be able to return $100,000 a year. Most of us are not contributing $100,000 a year to investments. And even if you aren't making contributions at this point, you can see how quickly a portfolio could grow. So if you're able to build up a portfolio of $1 million invested, that portfolio is capable of impressive growth, especially if you do this during your working years and you're not yet withdrawing on this portfolio. That's why they say the first million is the hardest, and each subsequent million gets easier and easier. because more likely than not, each subsequent million is being fueled by compound interest working its magic. And the good news is that saving up $1 million is really doable, especially if you start early on in your career. If someone were to start at the age of 20, saving just $210 a month, assuming an 8% rate of return, by the time they reach the age of 65, they would have $1 million portfolio. But if the stock market gives its historic rate of return of 10%, that monthly contribution goes down to just $100 a month starting at the age of 20. Starting at the age of 30 with an 8% rate of return, the savings needed would be about $440 a month. So higher, but still doable. Or with a 10% rate of return, that monthly investment drops to just $270 a month. And of course, all of these numbers change depending on the age you start investing, your target retirement age, and your expected rate of return. The earlier you start, the easier these milestones are going to be to hit because you need to contribute less over time. But it's probably the case that most of us are not going to contribute one set amount throughout the course of our entire lives. Rather, the amount that we contribute to investments is going to grow over time. And when it comes to rate of return, use a rate of return that you're comfortable with. If you want to use a more conservative rate of return, by all means, absolutely do that. And the closer you are to retirement, you'll probably need a smaller portfolio than someone who's, say, several decades away from retirement because, well, inflation. The biggest X factor of all comes down to your personal lifestyle. What income do you need to sustain your lifestyle? Does that require investments of $1 million? Does it require more? Does it require less? It depends on your situation. But regardless, a nest egg of $1 million invested at any age is still very impressive, and it is still a worthy goal to aim for. What are your investment goals? Let me know in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye.